I'm George Galloway, and I present Kali Mahorra on Al Mayadeen television. Here we are in London. I speak my words freely, either in Parliament, on television, here on the streets of London. Kali Mahorra means free word. That's what I speak. So Kali Mahorra is a two-way conversation. Check it out on Al Mayadeen television. Welcome to Kali Mahorra with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen television. Coming to you from London, discussing Saudi Arabia with an audience of distinguished experts and one or two enthusiastic amateurs like me. Now, what should we make of what's happening in Saudi Arabia and between Saudi Arabia and Lebanon and the Arab world in general? Now, it's very difficult at this stage in a pre-recorded program to make sure that we don't get outflanked by events. So let me stick to the big picture in these introductory remarks. At this moment, in what might be called not Hotel California, in the lyrics of the Eagles' hit of 30 years ago, where it was said you could check out any time you like, but you can never leave, some of the richest and most powerful people in Saudi Arabia are currently ensconced in the six-star luxury Ritz-Carlton Hotel, but they're not enjoying it. And they can check out any time they like, but they can never leave. They include the son of a former king. They include princes by the dozen. They include billionaires. Millionaires are way below the salt. They're there in their scores, if not in their hundreds. Hundreds of people are now under arrest. Their bank accounts frozen. And some Saudis are reportedly conducting a fire sale of their assets for liquid cash at knockdown prices. Sounds like an opportunity to me. The proximate cause of all of this completely unexpected whirlwind is the coming to power, effectively, of the 31-year-old Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, about whom we've had many discussions in recent months here on Kali Mahorra. He now is seizing power. That much is clear. He now is eliminating potential rivals, maybe even physically. Princes are falling out of the sky in mysterious helicopter crashes. Others are reportedly being killed in firefights, though that has been denied. But there being no habeas corpus in Saudi Arabia, we have yet to see produced the prince allegedly killed. Now, insofar as the superficial explanation of all these things is presented, from my point of view, sounds to me like a good thing. One of the first announcements that MBS, as we shall call him, made was that women would henceforth be allowed to drive. It's very good. And one hopes that it's the beginning of a new chapter in women's rights in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Insofar as it's a crackdown on corruption, again, who would quarrel with that? Saudi Arabia has long been one of the most corrupted societies on the earth, and many Western countries have done their best to make it so, setting up in big arms deals things which have ineluctably drawn leading figures in Saudi Arabia into the pit, the cesspit of corruption. And thirdly, the announcement by MBS that henceforth Saudi Arabia was going to be a fountainhead, not of Al-Qaeda, ISIS type extremism, but a more moderate Islam. Again, who could dispute or disagree with that? So as far as that goes, I'm with MBS. But is that as far as it goes? And what is the new relation between MBS's Saudi Arabia and the Zionist settler state of Israel? Perhaps we'll find out in the coming days exactly what form that takes. But one has to be suspicious when one reads the cable leaked by the Israeli press in Haaretz that went out from the Israeli government in the wake of something of extraordinary importance to many of the viewers of this program. The Prime Minister of Lebanon, Saad Hariri, may very well be a prisoner in the Ritz-Carlton Penitentiary. He may be able to check out, but he may never leave. After all, he was asked to come to Saudi Arabia, waved his people goodbye without so much as a scintilla of suggestion that he would not be coming back, certainly not as their prime minister. He arrived in Saudi Arabia, disappeared into talks, and briefly reappeared, blinking into the cameras, reading almost certainly someone else's words, resigning as the Prime Minister of Lebanon on a series of bases which not many people, frankly, consider credible. He made absolutely no indication, even to his own party and his own supporters, that when he reached Saudi Arabia, he was going to resign the premiership of Lebanon, something which in itself is quite unprecedented, someone resigning as the prime minister of one country whilst in a second country, and then making no further explanation as to why. That's why I call him the prime minister, not the ex-prime minister or the former prime minister, because until this matter is cleared up, it's entirely right, as the president of Lebanon has said, and indeed many governments around the world have said, any respect for Lebanon's sovereignty and integrity must involve continuing to regard Prime Minister Hariri as still being in office. But no sooner had Hariri resigned, but a cable went out from the Israeli occupation government which told all Israeli diplomats, and by extension their lobbies in the countries in which they are working, to get fully behind the Hariri Saudi narrative on the subject of Lebanon. Then Saudi ministers began openly threatening Lebanon with attack. And then first Saudi Arabia, and then the United Arab Emirates, and then Kuwait, and then, inevitably, the tail always follows the dog, Bahrain, all announced that their nationals must leave Lebanon immediately, giving rise to the suspicion, perhaps fear, that something big was about to happen. And the Lebanese resistance leader, Saad Hassan Nasrallah, has made clear that if any attack on Lebanon is mounted by anybody, they will hold Israel responsible for that attack and respond accordingly. This has set a wave of panic around the chancelleries of the world. The United States, France, and other countries have been quick to try and trim the fuses of the rockets that might even now be on the launch pads. So what's it all about? As a famous British song said, what's it all about, Prince Mohammed bin Salman? What's it all about in Saudi Arabia and between Saudi Arabia and the rest? Let's turn to our distinguished experts. Who's got the microphone? Who's going to make the first contribution. Adil Darwish, a very distinguished historian and commentator, and a proper gentleman, as you can see by his attire, is most welcome to kick off the debate. Adil.
Thank you very much, George. I think I'm going to stick to the facts as we know it, rather than the realm of speculation. On the first part, I think more important than allowing women to drive in Saudi Arabia, something predated that by a few days, which is for a woman to drive, she needs a driving license, and to get any papers needed a guardian, a father, older brother, or a husband. That was abolished, and I think that's more important, that giving women freedom, that she can have a passport, leave the country, go to education, without a guardian giving her the consent. And that was sort of, we overlooked it as journalists. And the second point is, yes, there was some kind of a Machiavellian move to consolidate power, but what kind of power? From 1979, after the attempt by Juhayman to occupy the Grand Mosque, and that's when the religious establishment came over. They were actually the religious establishment, the religious police. Then you have the National Guard and the army. Now, Prince Mohammed consolidated all the three. I don't want to second guess what the aims are. And the third one is fighting corruption, which, as you correctly said, yes, we are all welcome. And he gathered all these businessmen there. There's a drive also to sell about 5% of Aramco, that's the American Arab oil company, on the open market. And let's hope he does it in London, so we bring jobs to London. But Wall Street also is competing, and the Far East is competing for it. And that will bring quite a lot. And there was an opposition from a number of these corrupt businessmen to that. And again, it's a guess now here from the various analysis, he didn't want them to actually try to block it or try to use the backhand and all this business and derailing it. On Lebanon, it's very actually complicated picture. I think there was 2 days after the leak of that report from Haaretz, Hariri actually was seen with the officials from Abu Dhabi. I'm not quite sure what the picture was taken. Was it Abu Dhabi or Saudi Arabia? And again, we know the conflict between Hezbollah supporting President Assad version, while the Saudis felt that the people are left out and so on. It's a complicated picture, and let's hope nobody start foolish move, because there's so many fuses in Lebanon left over, and God forbid, we don't want the scene that happened in 2006 to repeat itself.
Some of the princes incarcerated, in quotes, in the Ritz-Carlton are eye-wateringly expensive people. Al-Walid bin Talal is one of the most famous capitalists in the world, owning a part of Twitter, a part of Fox, a part of Sky, owning Disneyland and the Four Seasons hotels and so on. It's not easy to seize a fellow like that and expect no consequences. Stock markets are falling, asset prices are falling, the confidence in international markets in Saudi Arabia bound to plummet in the wake of something like that.
That's one of the areas that not just me, several people are concerned about. Are these actually moves well thought, well studied, by just trying to block some people who might derail the privatization process and going on the open market, that can have these consequences, or is it well thought? If it's well thought and studied, then perhaps it can be avoided. And the second point, which I probably overlooked, is also what the reaction might be from the religious establishment. It's very reactionary, it's very backwards, and they are strong and have influence. And again, if measures are not in place to block their way, let some evil forces and even terrorism take place, then God forbid something bad might happen. Let's hope they actually thought this process through.
Who else would like to contribute? Yes, gentleman there.
Shabir Razvi, political and economic commentator. Thank you. I think the Saudi, or what I like to call the satanic Saudi cesspit, now stinks beyond any imagination. It has had crisis upon crisis over the last many years. And I think it's a multi-layered crisis, as our friend Adil was commenting. First, it's the economic crisis that's taking place in Saudi Arabia. Unemployment, as we know, over the last decades has been very high. The political crisis that it has faced in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, the parties that it has supported have been on the losing end, if you like, over the years. So I think to perhaps digress, to sort of move away from the internal crisis that is facing Saudi Arabia continuously, perhaps the new sort of crown prince, like it's a sort of tactics which is often used by any ruling elite. When you have a problem inside, you try to make it externalize it in some ways. So an aspect to that could have been to get Hariri to resign in Riyadh. As you quite rightly said, it's the sort of extraordinary situation that a prime minister of one country resigning from another. I think a bigger picture, as you were talking about, and the question that you raised, what's this all about? To quote another famous song, I think all I want is money. Really, the reality is that Mr. Trump goes to Saudi Arabia, gets a big contract for armament. Mr. Trump goes to the other Middle Eastern countries selling armaments, and all host of military equipment that is being sold, and also Aramco being sold off 5% IPO. I think an interesting angle is that Mr. Walid Al-Talal is not only a Saudi national, but he also holds an American nationality, an American passport. So that should be quite an interesting sort of situation developing, whether Mr. Trump is going to abandon an American national in this Hotel California in Riyadh.
I'm sure if the price is right, that can be arranged. Let me ask you something on what you have said, a very interesting contribution. You see, Adil made the point, he wondered and he hoped that this had all been thought out. The problem so far with MBS's policies is that if they were thought out, they were wrongly thought out. He is the author of the war on Yemen, which has turned into a full-blown disaster. He's one of the authors of the policy towards Syria, which has incurred yet another defeat for Saudi Arabian arms and proxy armies. And his attempt to isolate and bring about regime change in Qatar has also failed. In fact, all that's done is make Qatar more close to Iran and Turkey and even Russia. The king of Saudi Arabia, we mustn't forget that there is a king, even though he's not really clearly in charge of events now, made an historic visit to the Kremlin, to Russia recently, consolidating thereby Russia's growing importance in the region. So if MBS is thinking these things through, his track record's not encouraging.
It's not encouraging. I think we've got a huge challenge that in Riyadh, you've got a post-juvenile delinquent running the show. And in Washington, you've got a senile delinquent running the show. So, when you have these sort of catastrophic individuals trying to give direction to what should be humanity, trying to live in peace and harmony, and you have bellico statements coming out both from Riyadh and Washington continuously on different issues, I don't think it's a good omen. It's not a good sign. And I'll give you a new acronym for your show, George, today. I think we are living not in the century of USA, but we are living in the century of UIS, United Israeli States, which is United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. The axis of evil, which is trying to ferment, trouble all over the place, whether it's in the Far East with the Korean issue, whether it's in the Middle East continuously over the last 3 decades, when a country after country has been destroyed. And the reality is that Lebanon is a very fragile state, as we all know. And as Adil quite rightly pointed out, that there are many fuses that can be ignited quite easily.
Well, look, that's true. But my take on the current situation, at least at the time of recording, in Lebanon, is that there's an extraordinary amount of national unity on this subject, that they need to know what's really happened to their prime minister. His own party has refused to accept the resignation, has made clear that he has to come back and explain. The leader of Hezbollah has taken a moderate and stable, responsible approach to events, still considering Hariri to be the prime minister, and so on. So if the attempt is to make Lebanon fall apart, as it has in the past, then it seems to me that for the moment that has probably failed. There's much more. Well, that came from in the next half of Kalima Horra. Join us then. You're watching Kalima Horra with me, George Galloway, on Al Mayadeen Television, talking about Saudi Arabia. Let's continue with the experts here. Fra Hughes from Ireland, campaigner and author. Go ahead, tell us what you think.
Thank you very much, George. I think from my perspective, what we're witnessing is MBS installing himself as a war leader. Between the failure of Daesh in regime change in Syria, and they're being defeated and crushed in Iraq, with Saudi Arabia bogged down in Yemen and their continued proxy war with Saudi Arabia, what I see is the failures in Iraq, the failures especially in Syria, the failure again in Yemen, has changed a proxy war into a potential fully fledged, instead of a covert war, I think it's becoming an overt war. I think that the threats being used against Lebanon, I think Hariri's resignation, combined with Saudi Arabia's attempt to say that Iran was involved in the missile attack on Riyadh as an act of war, I think what we're seeing is another further realignment as an attempt of further destabilization and regime change in the Middle East, with Saudi Arabia, Israel, America, the Gulf states, and the Western states trying to...
There'd have to be... I understand why you say that, but with no disrespect to any Saudis present, but they're not really a fighting people. You see the difficulty they're having in Yemen against a ragged, ill-clad, ill-armed group of irregulars. Saudi Arabia can't really fight anybody. It can pay for other people to fight. Could even pay for Israel to fight, maybe in the past has. But they can't really fight themselves. So it wouldn't be a direct... the Saudi army is not going to invade Lebanon, I assure you. They can't even invade Yemen. Go on.
Absolutely, but I do feel that Saudi Arabia is being used as the public face for the attack and the threats upon Lebanon. But that obviously they've got a green light from America. They're in talks with Israel. There have been, I think Israel had huge military maneuvers recently on the Lebanese border. You've had leaders of the Israeli Air Force saying that they can do in 48 hours in Lebanon what they did in 2006 in 38 days. They said their firepower, I don't believe this is rhetoric, I believe this is a genuine threat from the Zionist state, backed and funded and militarily coordinated with America. Saudi Arabia could open the battlefront. And very quickly, I think you could see both America and Israel join in, all as so-called allies. And then what you may have is Syria feeling an obligation to the people of Lebanon, and Hezbollah especially, who stood beside Syria in its hour of need. I think you can find the same going through to Iran. You might find the Revolutionary Guards feeling they have to come to the aid of Lebanon. And then the big question is, what does Russia now do?
Yes, indeed. Madam, you are a Saudi national. broadcaster, former BBC, a very prominent and respected voice. How do you see all of this?
I think we are not looking at the big picture. Saudi Arabia is a very important country in the region, and if it is following its interest, why are we blaming Saudi Arabia? I mean, you said the Saudis cannot fight. We don't know. I mean, maybe Saudi Arabia is following the U.S. example in later years. The U.S. doesn't involve its soldiers in the battlefield in Iraq or anywhere else. Maybe Saudi Arabia is just using someone else to do the fighting, and why not, if it helps its interest? And the big picture, you mentioned the king is not ruling, maybe. We don't know. We see the king, we see the prince, his son, the crown prince. Maybe it's a dual ruling between amateurs and or sort of amateurs, and somebody is more mature. And why not? It's a good thing for the country, because the country needs a change. And you mentioning the Saudi women driving. Before that, we should see the history. Young girls were going to school 40, 50 years, from school, high school to universities. Driving the car never worried me as long as they were getting education and they were educated. And maybe the driving thing, it happened maybe a bit late, but better late than never. So we have just to look to the bigger picture. The war in Yemen, I'm sure both sides, they think they are on the right side. I'm sure they are both right. But the humanity bleeding is very, 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 it's very harmful for both sides, for everyone. And I think now is the time, instead of talking by weapons in the war field, they should talk by negotiations and end this humanity bleeding, as I said, because it is very painful. And just we have to look to the bigger picture and not speculate or just judge without knowing all the facts.
There's no television without speculation, of course.
Of course, yes,
we inevitably must speculate, especially in a pre-recorded program.
I know.
Well, that was very loyal, what you said.
I'm not defending anybody. I'm just asking everybody.
Sounded as if you were.
No. I just look to the bigger picture.
I just want to press you on this bigger picture.
Okay.
There's not many people who don't believe that MBS is calling the shots, that he is in charge. Certainly, that's what's reported everywhere, and no attempt is being made to contradict it by Saudi Arabia's vast media interests. Saudi Arabia overtly and covertly, especially covertly, owns a lot of journalists, and so if they wanted to contradict this idea, they easily could, but they haven't. But spare a thought for the poor denizens of the Ritz-Carlton. There they are. 1 minute they're princes. 1 minute they are intimately connected to the ruling circles. They're billionaires, multi-millionaires, mere millionaires. In fact, it's the millionaires that are serving the coffee in the Ritz-Carlton right now to the billionaire prisoners. Spare a thought for them. What did they do to deserve where they've ended up? And will they stay there? Or will someone come to their aid? Will there be an attempt to strike back?
Strike back is a very difficult thing to think over or whatever. But we don't know the situation at the hotel and what is happening. And also
I've seen some video. It's remarkable, actually. It's a palace, but they're all lying around.
As you said, it's a
they're all lying around on
six-star hotel. And I don't know. I'm not going to defend them or defend the Saudi government. As I said, the whole picture is not clear yet. It's too early to
No, that's true.
to judge what is going on. We
Zhou
don't know.
Enlai was asked in the 1970s what he thought the impact of the French Revolution had been. And he said it's far too early to say. And that was 200 years before, or more, 250 years before. So I take your point that it's early, but we must make a television program.
Yes, I'm sure.
so-
but
so what-
less
what-
speculation, please.
What do you think will become of this hotel and its occupants? Will they be exiled? Will they be executed? Will they be put in less salubrious imprisonment? What's your hunch on this?
I have no idea, to tell you the truth. I didn't think about it. I'm just waiting like everyone else to see what is going on or to understand what is going on and what is happening next. We don't know. You don't know. Even you want something to tell me. You want me to tell you what might happen. Tell me what might happen in your.
Well, I'm never shy to do that. Let's hear from a man who.
I don't know.
Let's hear from a man who has been trying to bring about change in Saudi Arabia ever since the day I first met him about 25 years ago. Professor Mohammed Al-Masari, tell us how you read the events going on there now.
First of all, it's clear that I'm a opposition leader, so I am biased. That's to be said clearly and openly. The bigger picture which the Saudi lady mentioned, she mentioned only one side of the bigger picture, a small side. It has multiple facets. Only one side has been mentioned. Let me just quickly say that King Salman himself, who is obviously declining in health, nobody can deny that. It will be foolish to deny. Himself is a well-experienced administrator. He has the Palestinian file, as they call it, because the Saudi royal family has given to everyone a file. Sultan had the Yemeni file. Salman has the Palestinian file since the 80s. Others have other files, etc. So he's well aware about the situation in Palestine and what the repercussions, and he's well connected with the Zionists. Now Salman is having a so-called Monday, every Monday, what they call the Monday meeting with few intellectuals, including Turki Al-Hamad. Turki Al-Hamad is a philosopher, a secular philosopher. He's not an Islamist. He was suggesting that Saudi Arabia has to go through the phases, but in an accelerated way, what has happened in Europe. Church and feudal laws must be smashed. And the only way to do it at that time, in the past, was through strengthening the king. We have absolute kings. And then later on, the kings will be dispatched off by revolutions and the public and the intellectuals. But at least this phase must be. And he, obviously, Salman recognized that this is a sound idea or the sound historical development, which seems to be the necessity of history. So what Salman did since he came to power, slowly pushing down the church, the religious establishment, which is a church. It's a Catholic church, but an Islamic Catholic church. And removing the feudalism, the feudal lord, are marginalized step by step. Obviously, his chosen son is Mohammed bin Salman, MBS. Why he chose an MBS, I don't know. It seems to be he's the most intelligent and the most aggressive and vicious of his sons. Clearly, I know one of his sons, Abdulaziz bin Salman, the one who's the Minister of Petroleum. He's a very gentle, smooth guy, a lovely guy, but he will not be able to do any vicious action. For this change, a vicious man is needed. And this seems to be the most vicious one. Very vicious. When you get time, I mentioned a story with his own mother, which got imprisoned now because of his action. So he's extremely vicious, extremely violent. So this one is the one who could execute the program. He was put in the Ministry of Defense, jumping from the 6th rank to a full ministry and starting his experimentation. Also, he's full of himself. It's well known that he regards himself as Alexander the Great, a re-edition of Alexander the Great. So this is the background, philosophical background. Now, the political background, I think, leave please, the issue of women driving and so. This is like a Western pastime. This is no good. This is all a small game to get the women folk in Saudi Arabia on his side in the internal power balance. But this is not relevant. What's relevant is that we have in America recently, obviously in the West, there is disgruntlement about the capitalist system in its new edition after the fall of the Soviet Union and the dismantling of social benefits, etc., everywhere, including in England, slowly and surely. we have a populist movement against the existing regimes, even in the West. This populist movement brought Putin, even Putin, Russia, but brought Trump to power. Trump does not belong to the major factions of American politics which are settling their disputes. There's no one single America. There are multiple Americas. It's a multiple-headed beast. But sometimes one head is the leading one, and the others softly and nicely work behind the scene to convince the head in the same direction. So we have the American nationalists, which they know what they call the American the military-industrial complex. That's the one is normally permanently in power through the years. Although sometimes it recedes. The globalists, the old imperialists, Britain, France, etc., and also the Bilderbergs, the big capitalism, they sometimes come forward like the time of the Bush, because he was sufficiently simple-minded, idiotic or senile to be directed by them. But Obama was not that. Was a nationalist. And that's the reason Obama stopped Israel. Israel actually arranged to Saudi Arabia to carry an attack against Iran. And the plans were fixed. The planes were ready. And Obama contacted them, say, if you do that, then I have nothing to do with you. I will not cover for you up. And if Iran answered back with any weapons against Israel, including nuclear weapons, we're not going to save you or help you. So they canceled the plan. That happened in the time of Abdullah. That's recently. That's not 100 years ago or 200 years. Just maybe 6, not even 6, maybe 5 or 4 years ago. So that's the situation that we have.
So is MBS a kind of Saudi Trump? Is he
exactly
a populist?
Actually, since Salman himself is an arch-Zionist and believe in this absolute kingdom approach to save Saudi Arabia, actually what he's planning since long ago, I sat with him once and he was speaking with contempt about his own brother Naif and others. He says he believes he's more qualified to run the country and they are inefficient and backward. That's what he expressed himself to us, a group of academicians who met with him in the early 80s. Already he has these in his mind. So now he got the opportunity to execute that, but life is short. He's ailing, so he's going faster than it may be safe for them. But that's the only way forward. So he's running forward. Now, when Trump came, he threatened that he will get jobs, and he will get money from Saudi Arabia, etc. Also, he threatened Mexico, but obviously Mexico did not cave in. Mexico is not Saudi Arabia. They didn't cave in, and they were not going to finance this war. But here, he found the low step, because in the JASTA laws, etc., Saudi Arabia is almost certainly implicated. Don't look at the 20 or 30 points publicized. These are just front. What is in the secret backyard is massive, for example.
Well, to know.
Yeah.
Tell us that.
Yeah.
After this. You're watching Kalamahorra on Al Mayadeen Television with me, George Galloway, in London, discussing Saudi Arabia. Saudi opposition leader, Professor Masari, was, before the break, telling us what really lies behind the political project of MBS, and perhaps his father, who may not be as much out of the picture as I implied he was in my earlier remarks. Professor, continue.
So the Saudis are in death trap. So Trump used that to pressurize them, and also they are already ready. The current ruler, Salman, and his son are arch-Zionists in the Zionist camp, the globalist camp, Zionist branch, which is now thinking, they think that we are now capable enough to move the world in our Zionist agenda. That's what they believe. Most likely they will fail, but let us see what they believe. So, and the main advisor of Trump, who is actually less experienced and simple-minded than even Salman, much more. He has no political experience or any government position before, any government position. He's a businessman. Maybe he's a good businessman, but definitely he is not a politician or with any experience in managing states and affairs. His son, Kushner, is the one who gives the direction and the advice. And the advice was that Saudi Arabia should be pressurized to complete its, which is already accepted in the heart, the agenda. And when he visited Saudi Arabia, the arrangement was to push Qatar out of the way, etc. And that was on Trump's advice. Now, in the recent year, roughly since last year, or even less, in the last 6 months, obviously the pressure on Trump inside America is mounting to a level which is getting closer to possible impeachment. So a decision was made that we should, the usual way, we should have something like a war so that the whole nation can be rallied behind the president, because in a state of war, you are not going to do an impeachment, and the president can save himself. And Kushner was sent to Saudi Arabia. He met with Mohammed MBS several nights until 4 in the morning. And it's almost certain that Mohammed bin Zayed, MBZ, joined them. And the plan was decided to do the following, to start possibly a war with Iran. But you have to find reasons to start the war, and trick the situation together. So the first step was to start with Lebanon. Lebanon is not intended by itself, and Lebanon is not as fragile as people think. Lebanon is quite stable. So they invited Hariri. The poor guy went there not knowing, and it's almost certain that he was detained and forced to sign this declaration, which is against international law, but shows that both Trump and MBS do not care now about the niceties of diplomacy and international law. But Michel Aoun double-crossed them by saying, I will accept the resignation only if he comes to the presidential palace and submit it officially the usual way, as it should be. And they are now stuck. So the whole screaming and the threatening to Lebanon now is that they should accept the resignation, even if the man is in Riyadh, in the Carter Ritz or in Abu Dhabi or where he may be. So they are now, the first step was actually a failure in part.
Is there any possibility of a backlash from those parts of the royal family who are now being isolated, dispersed, disinherited, imprisoned? Do they have the capability of a counter-revolution?
If we look at them, Ahmed bin Abdulaziz, who is the most in line of the throne, is weakened long ago, and he's relatively a soft character. He's a Polish gentleman. I know him from school. I saw him once or twice when I was in school in my young years, obviously not now. And he was a thorough gentleman. He came from America. He was studying there and gave us a lecture about American life as well. He was very polished, very nice. The same with Migran. Migran is a very nice gentleman. He was with me in class. A very smooth, lovely gentleman. You can play with him like anyone in the street. No problem at all. These guys are too soft for the vicious Salman. Salman was called, when he was the governor of Riyadh, the Fir'aun, the Pharaoh of Riyadh. And Fir'aun is in the Arabic and Islamic tradition, the peak of oppression and tyranny. Same for the Jews, most likely. So there's nobody there. Also, we advised them long ago through Twitter and publication, listen, you are in the queue. You will be removed. Protect yourself. Do something sensible. But they did not do anything sensible. When they have the power, for example, Met'ab relied on the National Guard. He gave order that if anyone tried to detain me, shoot him. But that does not work, because the one who come into detention are vicious Colombian Blackwater guys, imported from Emirates. MBZ have them for his own protection, fighting for him for a long time. These guys are so vicious and criminal, you know them. They will cut you in pieces for money.
The Saudis fighting vicious Colombian Blackwater guards. Somehow. I just need to move on because we need to bring other people in. Yes, sir?
Thank you, George. My name is Payam. I would like to first make clear that Saudi is the name of the clan that is running the country of Arabia. So they call it Saudi Arabia, named after a country most people already know. I would like to celebrate and be happy about these reforms of women being able to drive in Saudi Arabia. Many women are currently happy, but how can I celebrate when they are dropping bombs on Yemeni women and children? Many of them have been amputees as a result and cannot reach the pedals and hold the wheels of a car. So I cannot celebrate and be happy whilst they are destroying their neighbors, meddling and destabilizing their neighbors. Therefore, I see it as a lipstick on a pig or a dairy cattle as it is seen by the US, whilst they are milking them dry and will later slaughter them. Again, I'm referring to the Saudi clan. Interestingly, you mentioned the Saudis and Israelis a couple of times in the whilst you were speaking. There are a lot of similarities between these two states, which are interesting. Both states have been created by colonial powers, Saudis in the 30s and Israel in the 40s. They both misinterpret and misuse religion. Saudi misinterpret religion of Islam, and support the spreading of Wahhabism and cause a lot of death because of that. And Israel is misinterpreting the religion, the Jewish religion, Judaism, and they misinterpret it to apartheid Zionism, which is a very dangerous and is causing a lot of death. The second similarity is that they are both using American weapons to kill Muslims. Saudi is killing a lot of Yemenis, and thanks to the US weaponry, they are threatening other countries like Syria, like Iran, like Qatar. So those weapons gave them that confidence. And Israel is using those weapons to threaten Lebanon, to attack Lebanon, to attack Syria. More than 100 airstrikes, whilst they are already facing big problems with terrorists. So it is easy to understand whose side they are on. Because of that, you can see Israel have in 2006 been slapped by Hezbollah, and they never returned to Lebanon. It's 11 years. So Saudi Arabia is, it seems like they need something similar so that they stop threatening and attacking a country. And if they continue threatening and destabilizing the region and attacking poor people of Yemen who are already struggling to feed their children, they would probably receive the slap from the Houthis.
Thank you. Let's take your neighbour. Go ahead, sir. Introduce yourself.
Hello, my name is Robert Carter and I'm a journalist based here in London. I also assisted in the production of a documentary which came out last year for Ahlulbayt TV titled Saudi, a Regime Declining, in which we asked a number of experts what they thought about Saudi Arabia's history, how it is now, and also where it could end up in the future. We, of course, last year it was a lot has happened since then. A lot of the questions that we asked seem to have materialized now. Mohammed bin Salman, of course, and his behavior at home, and what appears to be a type of purge to seize more power in the country has come about.
And purge doesn't have to be a bad thing, though, does it? I mean, I'm in favour of his purge if he's purging the right people.
Well, they could be the only people left in the country that may offer some kind of opposition to his behavior. He's the architect of the crisis in Yemen, which is a ghastly era of foreign policy decision-making, and he's continued that conflict regardless. Also, he's the architect of the Qatar crisis, and it appears as if he may be the architect of a new Lebanese crisis as well. So clearly, I mean, he's on a bad
Makes
trend.
Donald Trump look like Aristotle.
Absolutely, and it's, you know, you never thought that anyone could make Donald Trump look good, but there you go. And the problem is that if he's going to continue on this trend, but then also purge what he considers to be opposition at home, then we may have a complete and utter tyrant, total tyrant, that runs one of the richest, most powerful countries in that region, which is spending vastly on its military and is also becoming one of the most destabilizing nations in a region which is already suffering many problems. And the US itself, I fear, is falling back out of the region due to sheer incompetence. You know, Donald Trump and his, even Rex Tillerson, for example, who visited the region quite recently, had to be corrected by the Iraqi prime minister because he didn't seem to understand that the Hashd al-Shaabi, the volunteer patriot movement in that country, are Iraqi nationals, they're not Iranian nationals. So when he told them to go home, they're already in their own country. So, and this is a US that doesn't understand the region, and I think that from that reason alone, it's causing countries in the region, like Saudi Arabia, to lash out more aggressively because they don't see the US taking up the role as being able to defend their interests through diplomacy in the region. So therefore they feel as if they'll just have to act on their own accord. And with Mohammed bin Salman appear to be quite a hothead, we may see more wars turning out over the next near future.
Well, the German security services submitted dossier last year to Angela Merkel, which described the Crown Prince as both a hothead and a gambler. And of course, there are some Saudis who gamble. It's haram, but they do. I could take you now to some parts of London where you'll find them. The gamble, therefore, is that this Lebanese adventure is going to go better than the Yemen adventure, the Qatar adventure, the Syria adventure, and so on. Sometimes gamblers double down on their losses. I've lost $1 million, I'm going to gamble too in order to get my $1 million back. If that's the gamble, it seems to me a very foolish one, because the adversary is not weak. As the professor said, Lebanon is not weak. The Lebanese resistance is not weak. They are battle-hardened now, as are the Syrian Arab army, as are Iran, and they don't know that Russia won't come in to any conflict, defending its current allies in both Iraq and Syria. So in such a confrontation with the United States with such a weak leadership, facing impeachment, maybe even imprisonment, I mean, my judgment, I'm speculating, madam, but my judgment would be that this would be another loser for Saudi Arabia. Is that your view?
For sure. I mean, I'm by no means saying that Saudi Arabia's policies in the region are successful or good. In fact, I agree with you in that. But although Lebanon is strong and perhaps not as unstable as many people say, it is, in my opinion, however, very vulnerable. And of course, you know, a new conflict, whether they're winners or losers, I would hate to see personally. And this is the problem that we have. Saudi Arabia is pushing and in a downward spiral towards more conflicts in a region which is already seen plenty of conflicts. They're blaming Iran and Hezbollah for everything, rightly or wrongly. I mean, if a Saudi prince wakes up one day and bumps his head on the top of his bed, he seems to blame Iran. And this is the problem we have, that if the Western powers are not going to intervene meaningfully and make a real change in Saudi Arabia's behavior in the region. Saudi Arabia, after all, are our biggest customers of weapons, and we're also their biggest customer for their natural resources as well. So we need to, as the West is concerned, we need to go in and try to become more of an important player in that region again. I think that, you know, our efforts to pull out.
That's the last thing the region needs.
Politically.
That's so the last thing the region needs.
Not with the military, of course, you're absolutely right, but politically we need to come in and tell our allies, which is what they are, what is right and what is wrong. And Donald Trump has no interest in doing that. In fact, I don't think he even understands the region at all. Saudi Arabia is beating the drums of war against Iran, and we need Western countries, EU included, to go in and say, look, this can't happen, and we won't let it happen. We've had enough wars, and that's enough.
Well, of course, his first visit abroad was to Saudi Arabia, and then he went to Israel and announced that he'd just been visiting the Middle East, which told you what he really thought about Israel. There's much more. All of that after this. You're watching Kalima Horra on Al Mayadeen Television with me, George Galloway, coming to you from London, but discussing Saudi Arabia. We took the Al Mayadeen camera out onto the streets of London to hear what the people thought. Take a look.
Should we be concerned that one of the biggest oil suppliers in the world is having a leadership battle at the moment?
I'm not sure about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that's happening in that region is going to have major effects for the rest of the world.
Yes, we should, because obviously he holds like one of the biggest sources of oil in the world. So we should be concerned with with his stance, with his global stance and his global viewpoint, and what he does with his newfound power, basically.
And do you think that Trump has any influence in Saudi's new policies?
Trump definitely does have an influence and a direct role in Saudi politics.
I don't think Trump is per se as influential as a lot of other factors that are influencing decisions there at the moment.
Well, I do agree that Trump has an influence in Saudi Arabia policies.
Prince Salman, he has taken a liking to President Trump and vice versa, and also Trump's son Jared Kushner has taken a liking to Prince Salman as well, and vice versa. So they're quite close to each other.
So what do you think that the Crown Prince meant by bringing moderate Islam back?
I think he meant kind of introducing essentially a little more user-friendly for people who don't take such a hard-line religious stance.
Yeah, I think he means that he's going to combat extremism and bring a new technological and social reform to the religious establishment in the country.
Will the turmoil in Saudi Arabia promote or set back women's rights?
I think the promotion of women's rights, the recent promotion of women's rights, is more of a show than actual, promotion. But I don't think it will have much of a part to play in women's rights.
Just from what I've seen, I think it's going to move things forward slightly, make it easier for women to hold employment without pre-existing societal constraints. It's going to be slow, definitely. Progress always is, but I think it could be a step in the right direction if it's allowed to play out.
Very interesting. The voice of the people, Vox Populi, on the streets of London. Let's go quickly to the gentleman in the middle row. Yes, sir?
Abu Saud from London. As I spoke last time on the similar subject, it all stemmed from Arab Spring from Tunisia. And we saw in Egypt how it was Morsi, a legitimate government, was downfall by Saudis behind the scene bringing Sisi. They saw they cross the river, across the sea, if they come, our kingdom will fall, the demise. So they, after these present, what is happening after visit of Donald Trump, he's the main driver behind this. And that was replacing last crown prince, but this one, 32 years old, and he wants to go not by toddling small steps, he's trying to run faster, arresting all those people. What I can say, there was a rebellion in eastern Saudi and Hijaz. There are something brewing up to throw the present kingdom. So they are making up this thing to have a war in Lebanon or Syria, Yemen, very sad story, to keep us engaged, and that will make Mr. Trump happy. He managed to sell 400 billion of armament. That's what I want to say.
Thank you. Madam?
The gentleman mentioned that Saudi might attack Iran. That will never happen, as much as the United States will never attack Iran. If we remember Carter's fiasco, and I don't think that will happen, because Iran is a big nation in the region, and Saudi Arabia as well. So that they will not dare, and politically speaking, it's not feasible to.
I agree with that, though some people are suggesting that the threats against Lebanon are really
they will use
Iran
yes,
into the aggressor role.
Of course, they will use each side will use his power to destroy each other, but not fighting each other. Face to face. And as for the West is very short-sighted. This is our dilemma in the Arab world. They never have a long-sighted, always short-sighted. If we don't sell weapons to Saudi Arabia, another country will sell the weapon to Saudi Arabia, so we have to do it. That and greediness as well. This is not fair. And it's a world of jungle, and each one is just fighting for his interest.
Professor.
Just a quick correction, gentlemen.
Yes, go ahead, Adel.
That's not actually the version that happened in history with the spring and in Egypt. It has nothing to do with Saudi Arabia. It just people got fed up of the Muslim Brotherhood rule, and they were out in the
You
street.
didn't give them very... how fed up can you get in 11 months?
Well, I mean, just that's what happened. As people were in the streets, and the army intervened. But the Saudi Arabia, well, that's just total nonsense. That just did not actually happen in Saudi Arabia. Just one quick question. We mentioned 7 countries. How many of the people who spoke has been on this country? Have you been to Lebanon, Israel, Saudi Arabia?
I've been to Lebanon.
Saudi Arabia?
I've been to Saudi Arabia. I've been to Lebanon.
And
I've been
Saudi-
to Israel. I've been to Syria.
That's good. Have you been to Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Israel?
Yeah. I told you, it's distinguished experts here, you know. Yes, Professor.
The policy since Machiavelli in Europe is the policy of greed and benefit. All these moral values, short-sighted, they are very long-sighted. Sykes-Picot was very long-sighted in the sense that it broke the area and made it incapacitated and
it lasted.
and lasted for 100 years now. And that is very long-sighted. That is not short-sighted. The policy here is not moral policy. It is greed and imperialist aspiration. So that's the situation. There's no West. There's nothing like that. And it is a mistake to think about our Saudi lady, with all respect, say the Saudi Arabia does not dare attack. Yes, it doesn't. They don't dare. They are not capable. But Israel is capable, and they have nuclear weapons. And they may be so foolish to think that they can use them in a certain extreme situation. And Trump gave the green light, and he will block any action from the Foreign Secretary and from the Department of Defense of America. So America will be just watching, which is a green light that they need. They will not step like Obama saying, don't do anything, otherwise we'll let you down, even if you are attacked.
Please, gentleman over there.
Thank you, George. I think it's good to be on the show again. My name is Sahal Ali, and I am Culson TV community program presenter. I'm also advocate for disadvantaged people, social commentator and political commentator for a number of TVs. I would like to make very good and quick comment on the situation in Saudi Arabia. The changes happening there are not to be blamed on outsiders. It is Saudis feeling the need to change with the changing world around them. The world is changing. The problem we have, the young prince who now took over the power of the kingdom is a bit unlucky, in my opinion. His attempt is to isolate Qatar, the rich a gas-rich oil country, has resulted in Qatar shrugging off and then pushing the country towards Iran. His war in Yemen is unwinnable. The product of this war was a waste of lives and money, and it produced humanitarian catastrophe. The domestic movement he's making is freezing assets worth of 800 billion pounds and placing ministers and princes under house arrest wherever he keeps them, will produce some resistance. We don't know what kind of resistance. I don't think the supporters, families, friends, neighbors of those influential people will stay silent. So we have to look. His desire to come out and show his muscle and engage with powerful and well-prepared Iran is dangerous, adds to the list of dangers. So what needs to be done? He has to act with caution. Saudi Arabia is the center of Islam, is a rich country, but it is now easily going to turn into a one-man dictatorship. If he meets resistance from these influential people who are now sleeping on mattresses inside hotels, whose assets have been frozen, I think it will produce a rebellion. Okay, so the country, nobody wants it, but the country might fragment into pieces. It will offer a ground for jihadists. It will give opportunity for Iran to realize some of its dreams. expansionist dreams for their own. They have to be as influential as possible. I think those who are encouraging him to do more, I think they are not wise enough to think the outcome. He is trying to make the country as open as possible and open investors. But the investors won't come when they hear people like Talal, Prince Talal, is under house arrest, the known global investor. So this gentleman, even though I believe he's too young to take these big steps, Saudi Arabia is on the edge of a dangerous position. And I fear for the people as well as for the kingdom. They have to act with wisdom. I came from a country which all of a sudden, unexpectedly, went into chaotic situation and disappeared. I think we have to be careful about, and as the gentleman mentioned it, there are opportunists coming into the market trying to sell their weapons. Many thanks.
Well, look, when I was 32, I thought that I could rule the world. It's only now that I'm nearly twice that age that I realized that then, at least, I couldn't. Now I possibly could. So there is impetuosity of young men, which may be what's being displayed here. As to who's encouraging them, it's not clear. It's not clear what the Western attitude is. And I generally distrust conspiracy theories that reduce all such actors as MBS to mere puppets that other people are operating. For example, and you alluded to it, there seems to be two American scripts, one being read by Tillerson and one by Trump. I prefer the Tillerson one because he's at least sentient and presumably speaking for the institutions of the US rather than off the cuff in the way that Trump does in his terribly uneducated way. Tillerson warned, effectively warned, by endorsing Lebanon's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and so on, which in diplomatic speak was a warning to anyone who might be planning to compromise either of those things, as did France, and their president was in Saudi Arabia when he did so. The British are very preoccupied with other things. The one person, and I was in Russia recently, I spoke with Lavrov, I spoke with President Putin. The one big question, it was alluded to by yourself, the one big question is, if things kick off, what will Russia do? Because one of the unintended consequences, many unintended consequences, of the attempt to overthrow the government in Syria has been to return Russia to the Middle East as a major power, a major player. And in parenthesis, the statements of the Chinese president at the last Congress also indicate that China will be much more proactive in international affairs, including in the Middle East, in the next period as compared with previous periods. But if Russia stands by its current allegiance and relations with Syria, with Iran, and by extension with all those like Hezbollah who have been fighting to defend Syria, then we have a paradigm of Russia, Iran, Syria, Iraq, Hezbollah. Frankly, Saudi Arabia would be insane to seek any kind of confrontation with that axis, because that axis might just finish them off. Now, I warned, I won't say their names, but many of them have been mentioned here today. I've warned Saudi leaders over and over again that, you know, your unity means nothing to the Western leaderships. They don't know the difference between Najd and Hijaz. They don't know the difference between a Sunni and a Shia. They're not interested in what happens in Mecca. They're only interested in their own benefits, as Machiavelli set them up to do. And I warned these Saudi leaders over and over again, when you are trying to break up other countries, don't you imagine that one day this spectre will haunt you? So it could be that the end result of all of this is that Saudi Arabia itself is no longer a state in the way that we recognize it today. And that would suit many people, including Israel, which would rather have 500 emirates in the Arab world than 23 Arab countries, and especially if they could be based upon confession, religion, sectarian lines, and so on. It's been a fascinating discussion. We're slightly hamstrung by the fact that by the time this program goes out, all of it might be otiose and the whole region might be up in flames. We must pray that that is not so. A big thank you to our distinguished experts and to the enthusiastic amateurs who came here today. I've been George Galloway. This is Kalima Horra on Al Mayadeen Television.